Rec-
That computer cuts this out already, and this is my briefing room. We have now taxied out to runway 08 left, and we are holding short on Yankee 1 for takeoff clearance. And we anticipate our takeoff clearance momentarily, so we would then begin the takeoff procedure, or the correction, the before takeoff procedure. So we will do the before takeoff procedure. Let's have a look at what the FCOM says before we look at a PowerPoint. Engine warm-up required. Verify an increase in oil temperature before takeoff. You'll notice I put a little 4 items up here. I like to think in numbers, so that way I won't forget when we come up to the procedures. Because remember, Boeing's procedures are all memorized. The checklist confirms that we've done the correct procedure. All right, engine warm-up. So we'll look for an oil temperature increase and run the engines for at least 2 minutes. Use a thrust setting normally used for taxi operations. So that would specifically apply if your pushback point was very close to the threshold for runway for departure. Notify the cabin crew to prepare for takeoff. That is, at least communicate with the cabin to make sure cabin is secure. So that's the second item. And that will probably happen while you're taxiing out. That if you didn't hear from the cabin, that the first officer would call and ask if the cabin was secure. And that would really be the number 1 point. But let's just follow FCOM. So oil temperature, cabin secure, and then the pilot who will do the flying will update any changes. So speak about any changes. Maybe you're given a different heading or different altitude from power or whatever. And then pilot flying weather radar on his or her display, pilot monitoring the terrain selected. And then that's 4 items. And then call for the before takeoff checklist. That would be 2 items. I kind of remember this procedure as 4, 2, and 3. 4 items are in the procedure. 2 elements have to be the checklist itself, and then the other 3 items happen as you roll onto the runway, that you have to ensure that chime, warning, whatever your company SOP say to the cabin attendants that takeoff is imminent, lights as required as you go onto the runway. If you're going into the runway for into position and wait, just certain lights, taxi light, turn off lights, and of course strobe anytime you're on the live runway. And once you're given takeoff clearance, then all lights, all extendable, fixed, turn off, and taxi and strobe. That's if you're given takeoff clearance. And of course, you want to make sure that you're lining up on you're lining up on the correct runway. You will read signs on the taxiway that you are in fact at the correct runway. Then you want to check the approach engine and runway before you move on to the runway. Of course, that's one reason why the last item is RA on the transponder. So that's the 3rd item as we roll on to the runway. So 4, 2, and 3. 3rd item is TARA. Then, once you've completed those items, you should be lined up in position. All right, let's go and have a look at a quick PowerPoint. Just as a review, we talked about engine warm-up and verify the cabin is secure. That's why you're taxiing out. You should get that. And the pilot who will do the takeoff updates any changes. We've discussed that. This is just a review in a nice presentation for studying. And the pilot flying weather radar set on his or her display, and the pilot monitoring the terrain. And then the before takeoff checklist. And the before takeoff checklist, first officer would call it, of course, flaps. And now a suggested way many airlines use this to ensure that you will not make a mistake. Because remembering, if your flaps are flaps 1, 5, or another flap setting, you won't get a takeoff warning horn, but it may not be the correct flap setting for that takeoff. So don't rely on the takeoff warning horn. That's why it's important that you check the CDU, flap 5 selected, flap 5 indicated, leading edge green. First officer, CDU, flaps 5, look over at the captain's page because it's on takeoff, flap 5 selected, flap 5 indicating, leading edge light green, and OPT flap 5. Meaning, hey, this was a last minute check. We calculated using the OPT, therefore we've got the correct setting. And the second item on the before takeoff checklist is trim, and in this case the captain would respond 5.5 units set. First officer would also check it, and then the before takeoff check is reviewing again. Once you're cleared either to position and wait or cleared for takeoff, before entering the departure runway, verify that the runway and the runway entry point is correct. You'll do that because you have signs on the taxiway. You know that, and you have to look at those. Now, advise the cabin crew. So now you're going onto the runway, you've got 3 items to do. Advise the cabin crew, double time in many cases, or in some cases, your SOPs will indicate that you have to use the PA. Lights as required. Put it in position and wait, turn off taxiing strobes, and steady on. If cleared for takeoff, all lights on. Now, bear in mind, the captain would have briefed you, first officer, on the use of lights if you are doing a low visibility takeoff for whatever reason. You're taking off under an RBR of 75 meters. The captain will have briefed you what lights not to use. The one light that you have to have on, no choice, is the strobe. That's law. Once you're cleared to either position and wait and clear for takeoff before entering the runway, all right, make sure you do all these items which we discussed already, and this will make it easy for you to study. Verify the runway ident marked in 08 left and that your track is 08 forward when you're in position. That's also important, especially 08 left. You could be taking off from an airport with parallel runways, or you could be taking off from an airport that have 2 thresholds very close together but with different runways, i.e. New Delhi. Runway 09 and runway 10 are very close together. The thresholds are very close together. If you're in a low visibility position, you taxiing onto the wrong runway, if you didn't check the markings, and you didn't perhaps have your ILS read the way your company SOPs may indicate, if they don't, I suggest that you use the ILS to confirm that in fact you are lined up and the track, and then once you've confirmed it, you can select the VOR so that you don't get useless movement on your PFD on takeoff. Use your head. This is called air maneuver. And airlines that are listening to this, this is but one good way to ensure that you don't have an accident. Okay. Let's go right into the flight deck and let's do that. Remember the numbers, 4, 2, and 3. We've got 4 items to do now. The cabin is secure. The oil temperature has been rising since the time that we actually pushed back. And the next item is to make sure that the weather radar is selected on the pilot flying side. So the captain would select weather radar, you can see it here, and the first officer would select terrain, or whatever your company SOPs say. Let's say your company SOPs instead that. There's terrain, and you did of course receive confirmation from the crew that the cabin was secure. And then talk about any procedure that you want to do after takeoff. Follow your company SOP. Maybe they dictate that you should talk about track 084, follow the SID, maintain 10,000, or whatever. So you follow your company SOP. Those are the 4 items. And before you go onto the runway, you will call for the checklist, and those are 2 items, and of course, flaps. Now let's come down to that now. one good way, as I just mentioned in my discussions previously, is the look down and say flaps 5 on the CDU, all right? And then you can look up to the and ensure flaps 5 are selected on the lever, flaps 5 indicated, and green light. First officer would say the same. CDU, flaps 5, flaps 5 selected, flaps 5 indicating, and green light on. And one more option, one more suggestion is he or she would go to their OPT and confirm flaps 5 to make sure no mistake was made. That's the first item on the before takeoff checklist. This is not done on the runway. This is done before the captain moves from the holding point. Important to know, you don't do checklists on a runway. And then the second item in the checklist is the stab trim, and the captain would set it at 5.5 units. 5.5 units set. First officer, of course, would confirm on her side or his side that it is in fact set, and then call for the checklist. You still haven't gone onto the runway. After the first officer reads or says, before takeoff checklist complete, then the captain moves on to the runway and lights are as required. Let's say you're, in this particular case, you are cleared to in position and wait. So captain is flying the airplane. He's got one hand on the tiller, one hand on the thrust lever. The first officer will reach over and put on the lights as required. So let's just go up to that panel. Bear with me in all of this. The software is excellent, but it's a little difficult to get things working at the same rate as you do them in the airplane. And then as you go on to the runway, you're going to have turn off, taxiway, and or the taxi light, I should say, and strobe and steady. Strobe and steady. Those are the lights that would be on as you're going on to the runway. And so the lights as required, and then of course the time, you would ensure that the cabin attendants receive the before takeoff alert in whatever way your company SOPs dictate. So double chime or whatever, how they dictate, and into position, and wait, zero wait 4, track 0 wait 4, and you confirm the actual runway was correct. All right. So 4, 3, and 2, or I should say 4, 2, and 3. And of course, the third item as you go onto the runway is the transponder. So it's the alert, it's the lights, and the transponder, 1, 2, and 3. Let's go down to the transponder and select the TARA. Now, the other thing to mention is that in reduced visibility, here we go, TAS, TARA. In reduced, and you can see it here, reduced visibility conditions, TARA before you go onto the runway or as you're entering the runway is good, because that's the only way you're going to be able to see it from somebody on final approach. So runway clear, approach clear, you're lining up in position, runway identification, runway 0 wait left, 0 wait 4 on the track, the localizer tuned to the ILS, confirm, keep tuning to a VOR. Now you're set, you're waiting in position, ready to go. That's our next briefing. I hope you enjoyed this one. See you for the takeoff procedure in the next video. Thank you.